let's get things started. Hey guys, Hattopy here. Pokemon rivals are just as big a part of the entire series as, say, something like the gym leaders or even the champions. More so even in some cases. They're your biggest test to make sure that you're ready for any challenge that comes along your way and to make sure that you will become the best champion possible. They come in all shapes and sizes with varying mindsets and of course different reasons as to why they themselves want to become great trainers. And to that extent, that's why today I wanted to count down my favorite top 10 Pokemon trainers in the entire series. And like always, I want you guys to play along as well in the comments. I'd love to see what kind of lists you guys would make. But first, we gotta lay down a little bit of ground rules as to who's gonna qualify for this list. In order to qualify as a rival for my list, they have to firstly actually be able to combat them, which means that Dawn and Lucas are going to be out since you don't actually ever fight them. Secondly is that they can't actually be villainous towards you. They can certainly be antagonistic, as pretty much all of these characters are in some regard, but their intent should never be on the villainous side of things, which is kind of unfortunate, which means that N is going to be shifted to the side on this one. Thirdly is that the characters, they don't actually have to have a starter Pokemon to count for this list. So it's not really so much a rule as is I'm being more liberal in that sense. But finally, they have to actually be a child in some regard. You certainly do have refights against some adults, but this is more about like childhood rivalries here. That's what we're aiming for in this video today. Now, with all that being said, let's just take some of the leftovers that I got over here. Put them right here. And just shift you to sec. And let's get on with the list here, shall we? This is going to be number 10. Serena and Callum from Generation 6. For sake of convenience, and for the fact that for the most part I actually really don't like Callum's design, I'm mostly just going to refer to them as Serena. So, the thing about Serena compared to a lot of these other rivals is that I don't actually hate Serena. I just really don't have anything I like about her either. She's a very bland character, which actually, if I come to think about it, Sharon's kind of a lot of the same in the same regard. So, as much as I didn't really want to put two characters into one spot, I might as well for this case, since they're really similar in a lot of ways. For Serena, she wants to become a great trainer to replicate what her parents are like. They're apparently these awesome trainers that you've never heard of before and never really will hear about in the rest of Generation 6. But she aspires to become a great trainer in that regard and views you as a competent rival in that sense. And she's even the one that like helps everyone else kind of get into the groove of becoming a Pokemon trainer, handing out like different notebooks and all this stuff. She's basically the nerd, but whatever. And other than that, there's really not much to talk about with her. I would want to say that her fights would be hard, but unfortunately with all the stuff I said about Generation 6, the fights don't really become any sort of difficulty for the most part. I do like that she tends to start out with a Meowstic that would always use Fake Out, so that's like the oldest trick in the book, but at least it's a trick, so whatever. And other than that, like, her fights aren't hard, but I guess if I was to give her one really good positive over a lot of other characters, she probably has one of my favorite designs out of the entire series. Not so much Callum, like I said, his blows. As for Sharon, Sharon's a lot of the same in that regard, minus the aspiring to be like his parents sort of regard. But he does kind of want to be like a really great trainer, and it kind of shows in the sequel as well, as he ends up becoming a Pokemon gym leader, so kind of works in that regard. But in that sense, for all this mediocrity, that is why Serena is at number 10. Hal from Generation 7. Contradictory to what I just said, I really do not like Hal. The boy is obliviously optimistic, misses out on so many social cues, and is inherently not very helpful when it comes to a lot of really stern situations that we come across throughout my playthroughs of Generation 7. And he's quite the glutton with Malasaldas. Those are going to catch up to you, my boy. But with that being said, I can't help but feel at least a little bit of respect for the guy, even if he does kind of irk me a little bit. He always put friends and family first. He's always there to help out whenever it's needed, even if it's not very helpful in that regard. And his goal is to become a kahuna just like his grandfather, which is something that actually sticks pretty steadfast to as a goal, which is something I can kind of respect. That's for certain. My opinion of him has changed a little bit since I finally played through Generation 7, for the better, of course. Though it's certainly not because of his fights. His fights continue to be incredibly easy to play through, mostly since he does pick the starter that's weak to yours. Now sure, he kind of balances team and blah blah blah, but I've rarely found I've never had much of an issue with any of his fights. But personality-wise, he has changed, in my opinion, to be a little bit better. So, for being infectiously optimistic sometimes, that is why How is at number 9. Trace from Pokemon Let's Go. I only really learned of Trace's name very recently, mostly just after I beat the game, and I'm not really 100% sure, so I'm going to roll with it for now, but if it's something different, then let me know in the comments below. This is what I found to be his apparent canonical name, but anywho. I was kind of worried about Trace when they were first marketing the guy in all these trailers and whatever. They're saying that, oh, he's going to be like a super friendly rival for you and all this stuff. And I wasn't quite sure what to think about that. Rivals shouldn't be friendly. They can be friends, and in most cases usually are in the series, but they should be rivals as well, and there's kind of a difference in the two, if you know what I mean. I got a weird headspace, but anywho. And after playing through Pokemon Let's Go, yeah, he kind of is the friendly rival I wanted him to be, even if I would have preferred a more antagonistic version of a rival regardless. Trace is always there to push you to become the best trainer that you can possibly be, whilst always in the background kind of doing what he can to be even better than that, trying to always one-up you. Which, I mean, is nice and all, except he kind of hurts his chances by always giving me items at numerous points throughout the game. So I'm just saying, could have had a better chance if you didn't give me so many potions. Yes. In terms of his fights, though, he always fights with a sense of honor and goodwill, and never discourages you about winning, nor discourages himself for losing, which is always a nice thing to see. And that attitude actually translates to a lot of different scenarios throughout the game. My favorite one, of course, being at Lavender Town, when he actually helps rescue the Cubone that was taken by Team Rocket, and ends up adopting it into the team, which gave me a lot of respect for the guy. So, for proving that friendly rivals can exist in a good fashion, that is why Trace is at number 8. Bianca from Generation 5. Sharon's counterpart in Black and White 1, Bianca holds the 7th spot for a few reasons, one of which not being for her fights. She's actually one of the easiest rivals on the list I'm discussing here, partially because she picks a starter that's weak to yours and also doesn't actually develop a strong team, in my opinion at least. But other than that, that's kind of the only bad that I have about her. Her design isn't anything too special, to me at least, though I know the internet certainly has other opinions about her. You guys are weird sometimes. Rather, it's her personality that wins in this regard. A lot like How, she's highly optimistic, bubbly probably being the better word, but it's covering a deep-seated fear of disappointing and disobeying her father, a person who does not want her to be out on any Pokemon adventure, around the world, whatever, in any regard, which is surprising as it's one of the few characters that actually feels that way in the entire series. You're surrounded by all these mystical creatures that can spit fire and all this stuff. It's so cool. And yet he's the one character that does not want to do that at all for him or his entire family. And it's something that is kind of interesting that's related to her in that regard. But she overcomes that with her strong determination and will, and even confronts her father in later parts of the game, and eventually earns his approval to let her go out and explore on her own, which is, it's a nice thing to see. And so while she may not be the most difficult rival, she does have an interesting story and backstory. And that is why Bianca is at number 7. Wally from Generation 3. Another character with a sort of tough backstory. Wally was just a sickly boy trying to live out his life in Burdenturf since it was known for his clean air and would help with his recovery. However, his family ends up moving to Petalburg, to which end his family ends up introducing him to Norman in order to get him to help out with trying to catch a Pokemon to allow Wally to have a new friend to try to help out with his recovery. At that point is actually when you show up, and you're the one that actually ends up helping Wally catch his very first Pokemon. And to that extent, that makes you the reason the boy starts his journey. I've always kind of enjoyed that angle about Wally. Sure, you are only just starting the game yourself, but it's thanks to you that Wally now gets to live out his own dreams of becoming this great trainer, and he gets to go out and explore and have fun and kind of help out himself out with his illness. And to that extent is why he ends up viewing you as a rival and mentor as well. And it's for all those reasons that I actually view him as the way better rival compared to May / Brendan in that entire game. His overall design is nice. He actually kind of looks a lot like N, except a little bit younger, but anywho. And for picking a Ralts as his starter, his fights actually become slightly unpredictable when you first play through the game, since there's a lot of uncertainty as to what kind of team he's going to build. Is he going to build one that'll combat you, or is he just going to build a general team? Who knows? But it's always interesting to go up against Wally, which is why throughout all of that, his great backstory, great character, and decent fights, that is why Wally is at number 6. Hugh from Generation 5. Hugh from Black 2, White 2 is quite the dynamic character when you think about it. He has a lot of bravado that he shows off quite a bit, but knows when to reel it back when it's appropriate. As well, his motivation for becoming a trainer isn't even rooted in the idea of being the best. It's just so that he can be good enough so that one day he might be able to confront Team Plasma for stealing his little sister's Purloin. It's such an epic backstory, and there's actually a really cool payoff near the tail end of the game when you actually confront Team Plasma with the Purloin, now a Liepard. Except now, the Liepard doesn't actually recognize Hugh anymore after these 3 years, which brings about the question about Pokemon's memories and how it memorizes stuff and blah blah blah, but that's for another theorist to go over, not myself. The events are kind of hard on Hugh, but his resolve lets him get past the events and lets him reconcile with the Liepard and move on with their lives. Hugh has a really solid design. He has actually some pretty tough fights throughout the entire series, and has a really rockin' battle theme as well. I really dig it, and it's for all those reasons: his solid design and great backstory and motivation. That is why Hugh is at number 5. Gladion from Generation 7. I feel like a lot of people are going to disagree with this decision to have Gladion on the list, since he certainly is the rival that you fight the least amount throughout the entire series, but the fights that you do have against him certainly prove to me that he thinks of you as a rival, since he ends up equipping his Savali near the end of the game with the disc of the typing that's actually strongest against your starter, so he certainly views you as a rival in that regard. In fact, not since Blue did we have a rival that deliberately went out of their way to make sure that their signature Pokemon would counter yours, not counting pure coincidences here. Silver picked his out of pure adrenaline since he was in the midst of stealing it. May/Brendan picked theirs prior to the game's events, so that doesn't matter. Barry picked his out of pure adrenaline as well since he was being attacked by a bunch of Starly. Bianca picked hers because it looked cute and it picked hers right after yours, leaving Sharon to have the one that was left over, so there was no real choice there. As for Hugh, his was hatched prior to the game's events as well, so that didn't matter. For Shauna and Serena, those two were pretty much the exact same as Bianca and Sharon, continuing on that same parallels with them. And as for Hal, he had his prior to the game's events as well. So for Gladion to actually go out of his way to equip his Wally with the disc that would make it stronger against your starter, kind of gives me the impressions of, them's fighting words. And, if that's not the sign of a good rival, then I don't know what is. His design is alright, though I still don't really get the whole John Cena hand thing that he's got going, but anywho. In terms of personality, he kind of plays an opposite foil to Hal, since he's more stern and more determined about all that kind of stuff. But I can kind of get where he's coming from, and to that extent, since he just had to deal with the loss of his father and the unhinging of his mother and having to basically run away, stealing a Pokemon that was being tortured by the Ether Foundation in order to become this ultimate weapon and all that stuff. So I can kind of get where he's coming from, though as time goes on throughout the game, his personality does seem to warm up a little bit more towards yours. He certainly isn't your friend, though he certainly does not dislike you either. So that was kind of a neat thing as well. And when it comes to his fights against you, except for the very last ones that you encounter with him, his fights are less about trying to one-up you and more about making sure that you are actually going to become a competent ally for him in the events to come, which is, it's kind of a neat thing to see. It's like a merging of the story and your battles together, which is always a fun thing to have. So for having a really interesting backstory and the ambition to be better than you in a lot of regards, that is why Gladion is at number 4. Barry from Generation 4. Of all the rivals on this list, Barry probably has one of the most dynamic character growths throughout the game. Sure, we've talked about characters with good backstories, but there's very few that actually grow throughout the game, which is something that Barry actually kind of excels at in this game. He's a hyperactive, fast-paced character that does stuff before he thinks, and it's kind of funny to see his little sprite dash around the screen all the time. However, as the story goes on, he learns from the hands of Team Galactic and even your own hands how much smaller he actually is despite his booming personality, though a lot of it is really well deserved. The boy knows how to set up a really good team. In fact, the rest of the rivals on this list all have some really good fights about them, Barry being no less. He tends to pick a more quick, hard-hitting team for his Pokemon, not counting his Snorlax and Torterra if you picked Piplup at the start. And he ends up being one of the strongest trainers, not in a battle tower setting in terms of levels at least. If you do all this refights at the very end of the game, he gets really high up there in levels. So yeah, he actually becomes quite the fun challenge at the end of the game. So for being just super fun in all regards, that is why Barry is at number 3. Blue from Generation 1. The OG rival, the one that made an entire division of characters for the entire series from the get-go. Blue, Gary, Butts, or whatever you want to call him, is easily one of the purest examples of what a rival should be like. Blue is a cocky, loudmouthed individual that really does not take losing very well. He aspires to be a great Pokemon trainer, even if it means putting down all of those around him in order to make himself feel better. He's just so good at making you hate him. So much so that he even snakes his way into becoming the Pokemon champion, which makes you just hate him even more, especially since he force feeds his Pokemon rare candies at the end of the game, just so that he can get that edge against you right at the very end of it. And all that being said, like he's got a decent design. It's nothing too flashy, but it fits very well for him. And yeah, he has some tough fights, and he becomes a champion. Has some really good theme for that, though. That's more of a champion opinion, which you could watch in a different video of mine. But anywho, he just encapsulates everything that it means to be a good rival, and that's it. There's nothing much more to say about it. Sure, it's not overly flashy like everyone else's, but he's the one that is making this list possible. So for all that, that is why Blue is at number 2. Silver from Generation 2. While Blue does everything that makes for a really good rival, Silver takes all that, as well as what I've mentioned previously, and adds on to it, making a great character with a decent backstory, some great character development, and it's just a fun character to interact with as a rival throughout the entire game. Silver is the son of the mob boss Giovanni, who resents his father for bailing on the family after the events of Generation 1. To that end, he ends up stealing a Pokemon from Professor Elm and sets out on the world with vengeance in his heart and hatred all throughout as he goes on his own journey for vengeance. Silver views you as his rival as he clashes with you, trying to test his ideals and methods of training Pokemon against the way that you would do that, trying to prove that he's more powerful in the end. However, as time goes on throughout the story and his method continues to earn him more and more failures, he eventually learns and succumbs to your methodology and learns to be more loving and caring for his Pokemon, which actually translates to one of the newer features that was introduced in Generation 2, which ends up letting him evolve his Golbat into a Crobat, which is something that's really interesting. I kind of like how they managed to make that work. His fights never cease to cause me trouble, no matter how much I'm prepared. He always seems to have a really well-balanced team, and it's always tough no matter what point of the game, which makes it even more special that in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, you can actually team up with the guy to battle Lance and Claire in the post-game in that section, and it's actually a lot of fun to do, to actually see this guy who's been so angry towards you throughout the entire game, now working with him to defeat a common goal. It's always a lot of fun to do. In terms of his design, he's got a pretty good design. I really like it. He's got an awesome walk-up music. It's really jazzing for some reason for me. And his actual battle theme is also really good. Silver is just so much fun to fight against, and that is why Silver is my absolute favorite Pokemon rival in the entire series. So, what do you guys think? Is there some characters that you wish were on the list? Is there some that you think shouldn't be on the list at all? What do you think the Generation 8 rival is going to be like, or what do you hope they're going to be like? Either way, leave a comment below. I always love to see what you guys discuss down there. But anywho, thank you all so much for watching. If you like what you saw, you can click right up here to check out some of my other videos that I've done. Or, if you really feel like it, you can click right up here to subscribe. And until next time, guys, I will see you all later.